Is it possible to implement the project USSR 2 today? Is the prosperity and success of Russia connected with the format of the continental empire? What forces in the country are striving to bring Russia to this format of statehood? Let's talk about this with Mikhail Viktorovich Velichko.
In general, we need a project for the future, our own project of globalization, which should be attractive to other peoples. In this project, the problems of each of the peoples and humanity as a whole should be successfully resolved. But one of the problems of the country is that we, according to official statistics, are dying out. And according to unofficial statistics, we are dying out much faster, because there are estimates that the country has a population of not 140 plus million people, but at most 90 million. There can be no question of the revival of the USSR, since there just aren't enough cadres to revive it.
I would like to talk to you about the following topic, which is very interesting. On the website of Alexander Dugin, in his article, I read that Russia as a state can effectively exist only in the form of an empire. An interesting point of view. The USSR was the last such powerful formation. Do you think that the project USSR 2 can be technically implemented, or is this an erroneous point of view and an empire is not needed?
Here, the main thing is to call things by their proper names. An empire, this is a type of state. But Russia is not only a state, it is one of the regional civilizations. Within the boundaries of one state, common to many peoples of this regional civilization. Therefore, Russia can only exist as a regional civilization. Or it cannot exist, and then her population will become an ethnographic raw material in order to replenish the biomass of other regional civilizations. Well, just like it happened with the Byzantines, who merged into the modern Turkish. Further, the question arises, what type of state power corresponds to the tasks of developing the regional civilization of Russia? What are the tasks, properly speaking, in this regional civilization? Because if the task is to bend all the others and then terrorize, there are such projects in global politics. The West is successfully implementing it. In comparison with other regional civilizations, it bends everyone and terrorizes. And if we turn to our recent history, then the collapse of the USSR is the result of precisely the fact that the West successfully bends everyone and terrorizes. Therefore, the question is about tasks first of all. Well, since there are other regional civilizations, the tasks should be such that their solution would be attractive to the peoples of other regional civilizations. Moreover, I'm talking about the peoples of other regional civilizations, not at all having in mind the ruling elites of these peoples, because the historical elites, in reality, these are egoistic subgroups who are not interested in anything except their own well-being here and now. Therefore, the elites are always willing to sell their people into slavery, if this provides them with at least the illusion of well-being at the first stage. And the fact that they will be deceived later, this is beyond the boundaries of the understanding of the majority of the so-called collaborators with the aggressors. Therefore, the first question is, what tasks? And the second question is, what type of state power is better able to solve these tasks? So, in the officialdom of Russian politics, in the officialdom of Russian science, there is no answer to these two questions. And this factually means that Russia is the object of someone else's politics. And what they want, they do. And if we talk about what it is that they want, then they want to finally solve the Russian question. That is, close the questions of Russia once and for all. Maybe the Russian language will survive somehow, but in general, it should be a typical European power, or many typical European powers. Therefore, when they say that Russia is a European country, behind this, in the defaults, is that it ceases to be Russia and becomes a conglomerate of mono-national states, which plans we regularly see when maps of the future Russia have been published over the past few centuries. But what is depicted on the coat of arms of the USSR? This is already a completely different theme, because it, in the final analysis, implies a global union of Soviet socialist republics. And when they talk about the USSR 2, then everything is not so univocal either, because many people talk about the USSR 2 as the revival of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in a form close to what it was. Further, there begin discrepancies in Brezhnev's times, in Khrushchev's times, in Stalin's times, in Lenin's times. And they say that the ideals of Spravedlivost that they tried to incarnate into life in the USSR, they must be embodied in some other organizational forms. So this is the preamble.
Mikhail Viktorovich, that is, the current elite is not interested in any kind of restoration of the project USSR 2, but is primarily aimed at its own enrichment. Why is there a desire in society to incarnate this project?
Well, because society is not the elite, and because in post-Soviet Russia, only the elite live well. Those who do not belong to the elite, they live either poorly or without confidence in tomorrow. Because if we talk about such things as scientific technological progress, well, look, for more than 25 years of Russia's existence, under the current constitution, such tasks as creating its own operating system, creating its own element base for the production of computer equipment and everything related to it, such tasks are not solved. The current state power is not able to solve even such a simple task as organizing separate waste collection. That is, food waste in one box, plastic in another box, glass in a third box, and so on. Well, the other day a tragedy happened. IL-112 perished. IL-112 has been developed since 2003. In a time of development of about 20 years, aircraft in the modern world become obsolete. That is, the country is unable to design an aircraft from scratch within the time frame that allows it to be put into operation and then operated for some time until it becomes obsolete. And this applies not only to IL-112, this applies to everything else. Because in order for a country to exist, for a country to develop, in general, other ideals are required. Another social organization, another cadre policy. And we don't have this. And we don't have this for one simple reason. A project of the future is required. As I said earlier, the project of the future is our own project of globalization, which should be attractive to other peoples. That is, that they themselves would readily enter into it. And in this project, the problems of each of the peoples and humanity as a whole would be successfully solved. To give birth to this project, to incarnate it into life, scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in business is required. Political officialdom and scientific officialdom have no such scientific methodological support, and it is not expected. It is not expected for the simple reason that in modern science, the main task is not to frighten scientific councils with scientific novelty. And if civilization is not even in a crisis, but in collapse, that is, it is confidently degrading, then it must be understood that only a different view and a different understanding of the problems of their occurrence, ways and methods of solving them, can lead it out of this collapse. And that world understanding, on the basis of which this collapse arose, is not able to solve these problems. A different world understanding, a different view is required, but this is incompatible with the mainstream of our science. Further, there is a cadre policy. Cadre policy in any state should provide what? The influx of professionally consistent people who have obvious ethical qualities that allow to maintain and develop the historically established system of state governance, and to remove from the state power apparatus those people who are not able to demonstrate their professionalism by deeds, and whose obvious ethical qualities do not correspond to the system. But with us, with obvious ethical qualities, everything is simple. If you can soar the budget and run protection on business, then you are good. But if we talk about professionalism, then the situation with professionalism is very bad. Because, as I already said, even organizing separate waste collection is a Herculean task for the current government, to say nothing of ensuring the country's leadership in the field of scientific research and experimental design work. But one of the problems of the country, we are dying out. We are dying out according to official statistics. But according to unofficial statistics, we are dying out much faster, because there are estimates that the population of the country is not 140 plus million people, but maximum 90 million. Therefore, how we are actually dying out is an open question. But besides the question of the population size, the reproduction of biomass, which is the carrier of ethnic cultures, there is another question: the cultural consistency of the population, that is, the ability of the population to prophylacticate the challenges of the time and respond to these challenges of the time. But here too, everything is bad, because our system of education has degraded and massively reproduces people who know nothing, do not want to know anything, and do not know how to think. Exceptions to this are rare. Well, if the system of education does not massively produce culturally consistent people capable of responding to the challenges of the time, then the question arises: who will solve the problems of the country? Because the problems of the country can be solved not by some one genius. The problems of the country should be resolved at least by a leading social group that carries in itself the project of the future can talk about it, can ideologically defeat opponents, show their malice or intellectual inconsistency, and has organizational qualities that make it possible to incarnate this project into life, governs the activities of the main political mass, which is usually politically inert. It has no political interests, because the main statistical mass of the population carries the interests of only three groups. Personal. These are mainly interests of a physiological and psychological character. Family everyday, and professional, since professionalism is, in general, a means to receive a salary and satisfy the interests of the first two groups. But everything that concerns political organizations, national interests, statewide interests, the vast majority of people are not able to say anything about this because they are not interested. Further, if we recall Eleanor Roosevelt, then to Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, belongs the following statement: great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. Look at the broadcasting schedule of our television. Ideas are not discussed there. Solovyov, Posner, and others, this is a discussion of events. That is, it is oriented on average minds. All sorts of shows, Let's Get Married and the like, this is a discussion of people. This is oriented on small minds. Our school textbooks are reduced almost to the level of comics. They also do not discuss ideas. In the broadcasting schedule, there are no programs from the Soviet era of the type «Очевидное невероятное». That is, the cultural politics of the state is oriented on massively reproducing small minds. And in such conditions, it is clear that there can be no talk of reviving the USSR, because there are simply no cadres who could revive it, even if someone wants it. Because the bulk of the population is tired of capitalism, tired of the promises that they are given by our political parties such as United Russia. Because if we look at what they promised 20 years ago and how it is really happening now, then these promises have not even nearly been incarnated into life. So, this is the situation with the prospects of USSR 2. And in general, if in such a way you look at what is happening, the people have not yet had their fill of colonial-type capitalism. Yes, there are many things in life that they don't like. Yes, many people hope that if they come to the polls and vote the right way, then everything will be very good. And the fact that all parties have one and the same scientific methodological support, oriented on serving the liberal market economic model in its colonial version, this is not something that the vast majority of the population ponder on. Therefore, USSR 2 will be possible only after there will not be only discontent, but there will also be interest in a project that is an alternative to colonial-type capitalism. And interest in the project, this is the mastering of knowledge and skills that are expressed in this project and which allow it to be incarnated into life. This is not yet the case. So, in the near future, we must go to the polls. Many will definitely not go because they have lost faith in the system. Some will go to indulge their illusions by voting for one or another political party, but the country will continue to live in such a regime in which it lives. It may even be worse if some external pressure is exerted in the form of a new pandemic, additional sanctions, conducting a cadre policy in a worse form than it is, an even worse credit financial policy of the central bank, because the credit financial policy of the central bank is not subordinated to anyone in the country. The central bank is not responsible to Russia for anything, and the only thing that it does is strangle the country with a usurious noose. Until they get fed up with all this and work out an alternative to this, which is understandable and in demand by a fairly wide group of the population, there will be no USSR 2 and no development of Russia. That's the way things stand with this project. Well, Dugin can also say that Russia can only exist as an empire. But you see, the question in any case comes down to how to govern the state, how to govern the economy of the state, what policy to pursue in the field of education, in the field of culture, on what scientific methodological basis should this policy be carried out. So Dugin and other proponents of the empire have no answers to these questions. They don't even understand that the Russian Empire collapsed because there were no answers to these questions, either in word or deed. In Japan, there was an answer to these questions, at least in deed. But here, there was neither word nor deed. The elite revelled in balls and the crunch of French bread. And when it was hinted to them that they actually needed to change the style of politics, or otherwise they would be drowned in latrines, they were sure that they had everything under control and everything would be fine. No, it will not be fine.
Mikhail Viktorovich, are there analogues in the history of our country when a group of thinkers who are the bearers of this new ideology, of some new vision of the future, was able to ignite an inert mass?
Well, firstly, the masses were not inert, because if we talk about the Bolsheviks, they had a certain vision of the future. Another thing is that Marxism, as a scientific methodological base, this is good for nothing. But they were able to ignite and captivate not an inert mass. They were able to give ideals, a vision of an alternative, to a mass that was already dissatisfied. Because if we talk about life in the Russian Empire, then it was the regime of Nikolai II that created a revolutionary situation. And the regime of Nikolai II turned out to be unable to resolve this revolutionary situation. And then it happened that the February Revolution was carried out by local liberals under the supervision of Britain. But the Great October Socialist Revolution took place, by all appearances, under the supervision of the General Staff of the Russian Army, who considered it good to enter into an alliance with the Bolsheviks, and the surface part of the iceberg of which are the Bonch-Bruyevich brothers. One led the counterintelligence of the General Staff, the other led the counterintelligence in the Bolsheviks. That is, the revolution proceeded somewhat differently than the textbooks of the Soviet era told about it, and not at all the way it is told about by the opponents of the Great October.
Capitalism is transforming, or one might say dying. But we are all still fascinated by its achievements. What is supposed to happen? What should be implemented so that the carrier of Russian culture will say, "Enough, I'm no longer interested in these capitalist implementations and ideas"?
Well, let's begin with the fact that, Sasha, you have expressed yourself inaccurately. Capitalism is not dying. Capitalism is successfully living and successfully killing the current global civilization. It is killing it in different ways, through the ecological crisis, the exacerbation of ecological problems, through commercial medicine, and through many other factors of the environment. It generates processes of biological cultural degradation of the population of all countries. That is, capitalism is not dying. It is successfully living and successfully killing those cultures of society that support it. It is successfully killing post-Soviet Russia as well. And then the question is, how people relate to all this. Because the spectrum of possibilities, it is wide. We do nothing, and Russia ceases to exist. At some stage, some group of people appears who says that it's impossible to live like this, and with the indifference of the rest, it can crank out some kind of coup d'etat, after which it tears up the current constitution and dictates some other principles. The dissatisfied will only be part of a small elite. The rest of the population will take all this as a given, simply by virtue of the fact that they have no political interests. They do not think about what statehood should be, what kind of socio-political organization in society there should be, how to govern the country's economy. For them, these are all objective, spontaneous elements. And further, there is a variant that if such a coup d'etat occurs, then what ideas will the junta sow? If the junta sows the ideas of development, then it will be supported by increasingly broad sections of the population to the measure that the quality of life improves. Whether it comes to power juridically legitimately or illegitimately, this will be of no interest to anyone, provided that it is successful in solving tasks, precisely the tasks of the country's development. So the spectrum of possibilities is wide. In the middle of this spectrum lies the evolutionary scenario. When the elite degrades, the state degrades, the circle of dissatisfied expands, but in this circle of dissatisfied a group appears that carries the project of the future. And when the elite loses power, these guys simply pick it up. This can happen peacefully, without upheavals, without tanks on the street, without special service ski mask raids at the addresses on the list, just quietly, calmly. In general, this variant is the most preferable, but it also causes the most aversion. Because it's a long process, in which, along with everything else, despondency will spread, and weaklings will self-destruct, seeing the hardships of life and hopelessness. Well, those who are stronger will work out an alternative.
Does the coming to power of people who are carriers of the idea of the future run counter to the interests of the global predictor?
You see, this of course runs counter. But this is not the case when someone will ask the world behind the scenes. Because, after all, a person, by his predestination, is the vicegerent of the Most High on earth. And if the Almighty supports someone's activity, then there is no force in the world that can stop it.
How long can the existence of this new state in the current global world, which is ultimately controlled by the world behind the scenes, last?
Announcements and prognoses, these are governorial acts that can change the whole alignment. Therefore, everything flows as it flows. And the Most High does not make mistakes. Everything happens in the best possible way, with those nravs and ethics that are characteristic of people. If you don't like how it happens, change your nravs, change your ethics, change your world understanding. Everything will happen differently.
Mikhail Viktorovich, but the critical mass of people who have this vision, a picture of the future, it has not yet gained the required mass in the country.
Critical mass, this is a phenomenon conditioned by external circumstances. Because in some circumstances, the critical mass is about 50%. And in other circumstances, the critical mass is about 5% or even less. Because if we talk about changing the character of the life of society, then here we must understand that it occurs at bifurcation points. At bifurcation points, sometimes one word thrown by a person is enough for everything after that to go not as it was going before. Bifurcation points are a separate topic in matters of social governance.
The nostalgia for the USSR, which has existed for 10 years in the social consciousness and is expressed in the form of films, programs, and a large number of artistic images, is this a kind of subconscious aspiration of Russians to resurrect this format?
Yes, it is. The dream of a golden age, which is always present in society, is one of the incentives for its development. But if we talk about the USSR, then the USSR was the first phenomenon of its kind, which showed that, yes, it is possible to live differently. And Russians cannot be forgiven in other countries for the fact that the Soviet Union fell and deprived other peoples of the dream of the future.
Mikhail Viktorovich, that is, everything again comes down to personal development?
Not a change of elites, not a change of regime, but the personal development of people as the basis of social development. This is the prerequisite for changing the character of the socio-political organization and changing the character of state governance. At the heart of everything is personal development. The more massive it is, the faster it proceeds. The faster the transformation of the country and the whole world will take place. And it is not necessary to hope that a new elite will suddenly appear from somewhere and put things in order. It is also not necessary to hope that the current elite will grow wiser, repent, and become noble.
That is, everything is so simple. Everything comes down to personal development.
It really is so simple. It all comes down to personal development. It must be understood that those who live in TikTok live under the power of those who watch TV. Those who watch TV live under the power of those who read books. Those who read books live under the power of those who write books. And books are written by those who are either inspired by other behind-the-scenes political forces, or by those who independently perceive the world and independently comprehend what they perceive. Sovereignty does not begin with a declaration of sovereignty. Sovereignty begins with an independent perception of the world, of reality, and with an independent, adequate comprehension of what is happening and of the prospects. And if we live by other people's opinions, then there is no sovereignty, nor can there be.
Therefore, in order to increase the number of people involved in the process of self-development, the question inevitably arises of limiting the consumption of other people's ideas, and those which come from TV, from TikTok, from social networks.
Well, of course, a fair amount of rubbish should be removed from the screens. And again, you see, it's one thing to look and say that we were offered another portion of idiocy, and another thing to look and to believe, oh, how great. But indeed, people tend to perceive many things that are shown on television, the internet, as reliable information, without critical thinking. But Japan in 2015 banned the teaching of Western humanitarianism in its leading higher educational institutions. This is a step towards the restoration of sensory intellectual sovereignty. China has banned teaching in its schools based on foreign curricula. This is also a step. We still rely on the Bologna system. While this reliance continues, this is a rejection of sovereignty. While we are messing around with a unified state examination, rejecting a really good Soviet school, this is a rejection of sovereignty. When we strive to transfer a school to remote work, distance learning, digitalization, this is also a rejection of sovereignty. Outside the officialdom of politics and science, there is a project for the future and scientific methodological support, economics of innovative development, 6-volume Fundamentals of Sociology. In the West, outside of officialdom, this is not the case. Therefore, with all our problems, we are ahead of the rest of the planet, precisely on the path of identifying and resolving the problems of global civilization. The only question is, who will read it? When there is beer to chug, the opportunity to have a barbecue in the countryside, change the car for a newer one, old phone, which is still quite functional, but has become unfashionable, change it to a new one, which is extremely fashionable. What are we investing in? In the personal development of ourselves, our children and grandchildren, or in consumerism? If in consumerism, then Mother Earth does not need a mass of consumer whores. Therefore, whatever happens to them, everything is deserved. Therefore, when a social catastrophe occurs, and people fall off a plane in the process of fleeing, one can regret that they have reached this stage. But if the moron hung on a plane in the hope of flying out of the country, then he got what he deserved. Yes, it is cruel. The conditions for this cruelty are created by people themselves, by their thoughtless consumerist attitude towards life. A human. This is a creative potential that is realized under the power of the dictatorship of Soviet. If one of these is missing, the creative potential is refused, there is no will, no Soviet, then there is no human. There is a humanoid non-human. In God's predetermination, humanoid non-humans are not provided for an ecological niche. And this is spravedliv. So, personal development, under the power of the dictatorship of Soviet, in a consciously volitional order, this is the path that allows to identify and resolve all problems of any scale, be it personal, be it universal.